understand is that the non-dual conferences that I've been involved with have shifted, and this year's conference in October is going to be called Science and Non-Duality. And I was excited about that because there are a number of people in the field of mathematics and quantum mechanics and have moved into some way of being in the non-dual camp. And because so much of what I've been experimenting and working with in terms of the multiple person biofeedback has moved in that direction. So I get excited when I think about the possibility of preparing or doing a paper or doing a live demonstration which can demonstrate the possibility of 4 people organizing themselves, each individually and together, for a condition which I'm calling presence.
Okay.
And in the demonstration which you and I did a few weeks ago, it's very clear to me that you understand the interface between the technology and how your inner sense and your physiological functioning come together and provide you with information about your own subjective experience, which, as you're in dialogue or inquiry with me, seems to provide more opportunities for shared meaning.
Right. That's also my experience, and there was something you said a moment ago that I wanted to, for the sake of this recording, for you to clarify, and I've forgotten what that is. I think it was along the lines of exactly what the neurofeedback or biofeedback has to do with presence itself.
What I found is that each person who participates has their own ideas about what that is. And what we have found is that the rhythm of the heart, once it becomes established as a resonant behavior or coherent behavior between the heart and other organ systems, there's an enhanced efficiency or an efficacy in the way the heart's behaving, and this becomes then a way to monitor this condition of resonance. So what we're finding is that as people become more resonant and can recognize within themselves what that state is like, then there's a learning process whereby they acquire a more clear sense of how to be present. And so moving from the word coherence as a physiological finding to the term presence, we have to engage in what does that mean? How does each participant understand, and how do they enhance their effectiveness of being in that way together? It's fairly easy for a person to identify within themselves, but what is it that occurs when 2 or more people come together and can confirm or affirm within themselves and with each other at the same time? Right. And what I feel that you and I demonstrated those weeks ago was a very clear quality to the inquiry or the dialogue which ensues as a consequence of this affirmation or confirmation of this coherent or co-present condition. Does that answer that?
Yes, I believe it does. And there's a kind of concurrent need, it seems to me. I almost feel like I'm in an interviewer role here, because I'm trying to fill in the gap for anybody who's not familiar with the technology we're speaking of. So I'll say a little bit and you can kind of refine my language a bit. Sure. If that's needed. So we're talking about a technology in which one's heart rate and the variability in one's heart rate is monitored, and it's up on a screen, and there are other things that are trackable on that screen, and you ought to have set it up so that there are 4 linked screens. 4 different participants can each be looking at tracings of their own readings, and the possibility of seeing the other readings of the other 3 participants at the same time.
That's right.
And you showed me last time we got together that you can use a kind of mask where a person would initially presumably only be looking at their own traceable phenomena being recorded on the screen, and by that means eventually using intention, is what I discovered in my own case, to bring the heart rate variability in line with a sine wave that you've set as a reference point. And that's what we're talking about in terms of coherence.
Right.
And we can move towards, I was able to move towards my breathing rate and my heart rate actually following this wave pattern.
It is that wave pattern.
Because
we're picking up both in the initial stages, we'll pick up both the respiration, the style of respiration, the rate of respiration, and the heartbeat from a wrist to wrist electrical connection. And what we do very easily then is to understand that as the organ system called breathing and the organ system called the heart, each with their own independent rhythms, as they come together in a coherent rhythm, we can also infer that other organ systems relating to blood pressure, brain function, and by extension to other organ systems also become entrained into this coherent rhythm. And there's a very specific experience then which ensues from participating in this rhythm.
And that's partly what's exciting to me. So I've got 3 or 4 things coming up as we're speaking about this now. One is, I realize I'm getting near 10 minutes, so we'll have to watch and see, make sure that this might need to be renewed. So the first thing is, you spoke of other rhythms that are not immediately being traced via the technology, but seem to be also entrained. And prior to sort of beginning this recording, we were talking about, in osteopathic terms, the primary respiratory mechanism, which is in a sense the most formative, most fundamental, most underlying rhythm of the life force, tracing of vitality in the system itself. So I find myself really excited as both an osteopath and someone very interested in presence, and how do we engender, how do we share the fact, how do we coexist in a way that reinforces and recognizes and acknowledges all the ways in which we can be and essentially are, sometimes not very knowingly, present in the world.
Right, and that's precisely my life project, my life's work has been to make this information sharing more tangibly available, by way of simply monitoring, not measuring, not quantifying, but by monitoring and providing the information to the person or to the group, making the information sharing much more less private and much more available. We're not interested so much in the quantification and how does this stack up against others or in other systems, or it's to provide more information for the participants. Otherwise it would be like a live
access this state of being.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And then, as we were describing before, how will it be when we can rest in this condition of presence and affirm it between ourselves?
Right.
That's the essential premise. How will it be when we can rest together in open-hearted, open-minded, shared space? And when we understand that there's underlying physiology which gives rise to our experience in particular ways, then the biofeedback becomes a way to support us in navigating and sustaining this condition, and then experiencing the enhanced quality of the dialogue or the inquiry.
And that to me is in part an answer to that question, how will it be? Every time coherence begins, there's a qualitative change in the field.
Yeah.
It's happening now.
Yeah.
So there's something about the lived experience, the undeniable physical, emotional, spiritual, energetic sense of aliveness.
Which is a subjective aspect.
Right.
Which, as a consequence of the way we've done science for 250 years, we essentially have drummed out this whole aspect of our human organization.
Yes.
Just by simply in education and the cultural and societal rules and regulations.
Right.
And so what I have found is that this practicing presence together, or as I call it with the equipment, is called the presencing suite. We have to learn the language of this co-subjectivity to realize that each one of us has our own variations, but it's coming from the same essential aspect. And to bring that and to learn this taxonomy of terms and language, using the feedback moment to moment, we can then learn how to dialogue by navigating more effectively in this condition of presence.
And it's my experience that something happens in many different scenarios, situations. Obviously, has happened throughout time, without this technology. The use of it, and the exciting thing for me is that it points to something that's so familiar already, and can perhaps be used as an additional tool for some others to gain access in a way that for anyone who appears to need or benefit from some more seemingly objective and tangible or scientific verification of how did I get to this state and what's involved, what actually happens along the way as I move from being overwhelmed by my concerns day to day and looking into the future and worrying about the past, and instead come fully present to the awesome experience of being right here, right now. What happens?
Yeah. That's almost the ultimate description of moving step by step, so that the learning opportunity and the fulfillment of those learning steps can be observed, and rather than it being magical or mysterious, we get to sort of unpack the steps and the stages, and particularly the learning from each other. This becomes the process has a way of quickening as people have a sense of what's true for themselves is reflected in someone else's carving a little closer to their truth. And there is some magic in how it unfolds, but it can be confirmed by the group as a whole, and that to me is a very important. Moving what we've heretofore considered to be a private, what goes on in my mind is private, to be able to move closer to the reality that in fact it's not, it never was, and being comfortable with that emerging reality.